What are the SDGs? In 2015, world leaders of 193 member states of the United Nations agreed to 17 global goals, officially known as the Sustainable Development Goals and pronounced SDGs. These goals were carefully identified as having the potential to change the world by 2030 through poverty eradication, fighting inequality, and addressing the urgency of climate change. The 17 goals constitute of 169 targets and 230 indicators. The global goals are ambitious but achievable. It integrates all three aspects of sustainable development, and they are social, economic, and environmental. Goal 5. Gender Equality. Goal 5's target is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. There are 9 targets in Goal 5. Our world today is a better place for women than it was in the past, but disparities still remain. There are fewer girls forced into early marriages. There are more political offices for women serving in parliaments and positions of leadership. There are favorable legislations that reform discriminatory practices and advance gender equality. Despite these gains, prejudicial laws and social norms persist, and harmful practices and other forms of violence against women and girls continue. Barriers to women's sexual and reproductive health and rights prevail. Despite more representation in public offices, women continue to be underrepresented at all levels of political leadership. Based on data from 87 countries, 1 in 5 women and girls under the age of 50 will have experienced physical and/or sexual violence by an intimate partner within the last 12 months. Harmful practices such as child marriage steal the childhood of 15 million girls under age 18 every year. It is feared that the global pandemic could set back progress to end child marriage and female genital mutilation. A prevalent harmful practice in Africa is the female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation, FGM for short, is a grave human rights violation that affects at least 200 million women in the 30 countries where the practice is concentrated. Half of the 30 countries is in West Africa. On average, the prevalence of FGM has declined by 1/4 since around 2000. Marriage before the age of 18 is a human rights violation. Today, the risk of child marriage is highest in sub-Saharan Africa, where more than 1 in 3 women between the ages of 20 and 24 were married before the age of 18. School closures and widening poverty as a result of the pandemic could put more girls at risk. UNDP-Africa shares the following data. Women earn only 77 cents for every dollar that men get for the same work. 35% of women have experienced physical and/or sexual violence. Women represent just 13% of agricultural land holders. Almost 750 million women and girls alive today were married before their 18th birthday. 2/3 of developing countries have achieved gender parity in primary education. And lastly, only 24% of national parliamentarians were women as of November 2018, a small increase from 11.3% in 1995. Future landscape. What is the way forward? Despite Africa leading the world in appointing female legislators at 24.2% compared to the world average of 23.6%, African women are still more likely than men to be in vulnerable employment. The goal of achieving a fair and equal world for every woman and girl remains unfulfilled and even more distant now, since women and girls are the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has exacerbated the many risks and problems that women are already exposed to, thereby causing a shadow pandemic. This shadow pandemic is seen in, to mention only two, the rise in domestic violence for girls and women, and loss of jobs for women who hold majority of insecure, informal, and lower-paying jobs. In an April 2020 policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on women, UN Women argues for why it is crucial for all national responses to place women and girls, their inclusion, representation, rights, social and economic outcomes, equality and protection at the center, if the responses are to have the necessary impact. The brief backs its position up as follows, and I quote, "Women will be the hardest hit by this pandemic, but they will also be the backbone of recovery in communities. Every policy response that recognizes this will be the more impactful for it." The United Nations recommends that as governments enact fiscal relief measures, they must build economic and social policies that place women's economic lives at the heart of the pandemic response and recovery plans, including putting cash in women's hands and extending basic protections to informal workers. UNC's faculty and research engaging with this goal. Professor Emily Burrill is Associate Professor with the Departments of History and Women's and Gender Studies at UNC Chapel Hill. She is also the Director of the university's Center for African Studies. Professor Burrill shares her thoughts with us.
SDG Goal number 5 states that gender equality is not only a fundamental right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. African communities and African organizations have done a tremendous amount of work in the recent past to combat challenges to gender inequality, such as girls' encumbered access to school, forced marriages, and violence against women and girls. I continue in my own research as a historian who looks at law and society to be very inspired and interested in the work that women's legal aid organizations are doing in different African contexts. For example, aid organizations, legal aid organizations, have done a tremendous amount of work in trying to broker the communication between local community groups on the ground in different communities and the ways that states organize and pass different kinds of laws that govern the formal arenas and access to resources. Even though there are significant limitations to the work that the law can do, I am really interested in the fact that there are different creative strategies that African organizations are using to challenge the state, for example. So in many cases, what we see are examples of local legal aid societies engaging the African Court of Human Rights in order to put pressure on states. These are creative, deft approaches and strategies for making sure that women's rights and girls' rights stay on the forefront of priorities and agendas.
In conclusion, gender bias is undermining our social fabric and devalues all of us. It is not just a human rights issue. It is a tremendous waste of the world's human potential. By denying women equal rights, we deny half the population a chance to live life at its fullest. Political, economic, and social equality for women will benefit all the world's citizens. Together, we can eradicate prejudice and work for equal rights and respect for all. To achieve gender equality, bold, persistent, and sustainable actions targeting structural barriers and causes of discrimination against women is needed. This should be backed up by the appropriate laws and policies, funding, and strong accountability frameworks. For the goals to be met, everyone needs to do their part. Academic and research institutions, governments, the private sector, civil society, bilateral and multilateral institutions, the development community, and the general public. To learn more about the SDGs in Africa, please visit www.sdgcafrica.org.